The destructive principle is exactly what it sounds like. It's kicking down a wall, it's a wrecking ball, it's destroying something, it's starting afresh. And it's opposed to the constructive principle, which is building the wall, making something, having a cohesive argument, a set of policies to implement whatever it may be. And I think it's not a negative positive thing. I don't think either is necessarily always better than the other. Sometimes you have to destroy something, of course, before you can build something. But I think we live in an age at the moment of an overriding sense of the destructive principle. And I think we need to think more about, if we're destroying something, what are we constructing in its place? And I think you can see this a lot online. You can see it in, for example, the most obvious place, podcasts and, what I've called new elite media. People like Joe Rogan and Jordan Peterson and Trigonometry and, people like Chris Williamson or Lex Friedman, Tim Pool, all of those people. There's different gradients of this. It's not possible to exactly categorize people in this way. And maybe I've got a bit of confirmation bias here. I'm not sure. Again, let me know what you think in the comments. But I think a lot of these people are clearly, thematically, heavily, repeatedly critical of offline institutions, the mainstream media, institutional science, universities, the pharmaceutical companies with COVID and the vaccines. And this is why the free speech theme comes up so often, because anything that tries to control or regulate speech in any way, whether it's in advertising, whether it's in pharmaceuticals, whether it's, a media company omitting a story, free speech is a criticism of that. And again, it's not a one-to-one thing. I'm not saying free speech is a destructive principle, but the energy seems to me to be directed towards tearing down and criticising a lot of these institutions and regulatory boards and governments, media, education, whatever it is. You can see it with someone like Andrew Tate and the so-called manosphere, that there's a matrix, which essentially, in sociological terms, means the set of institutions in our lives that tell you how to think, what to think, oppress you, that, feminism is an institutional way of controlling men, and the destructive principle is tearing all of that down. You can see it in conspiracy theories. You can see it with Russell Brand and, the constant banging the drum on something like the Great Reset, that the WEF is just not just there are plenty of critiques to be made at the WEF, but the point is often that it's part of the big they agenda, combined with wanting to vaccinate everyone, combined with trying to oppress farmers, combined with trying to control free speech. A strange mix of communo-capitalism, where they're both a huge global capitalist organisation, but also they want to control everything communistically, and you'll own nothing and be happy. So there's a weird melting pot there that's just a destructive principle. You see it most obviously in Trump, who wants to drain the swamp. And you see it in populism in general online. The internet is this massive populist machine, and by that nature, it is a machine that tends to gravitate towards arguments that rely on ordinary people as a bulk of online ordinary people versus a minority of elites, a minority of immigrants, pure versus the impure, the heartland, the good, the decent, the hard-working versus the corrupt. And again, while it hasn't always been historically, there are examples of populism as a force for good. I think most notably in the late 19th century in America, in the Granger's movement, which contributed to a lot of the New Deal, which was constructive. Often populism is a very destructive principle. And, I'm torn on populism at the moment. I think we need a kind of left populism to counter what's going on the right. At the same time, it kind of empties any critique and argument of any nuance, like just slotting anything into there are ordinary people and they're all good, and there are elites and they're all corrupt, and that includes universities and mainstream media, and what includes an ordinary person. Like, I feel I'm automatically a little bit hesitant to go down that road. But at the same time, I think it's useful to think of populism as a rhetorical style, a toolbox, a way of speaking. Like, obviously, if you're speaking to the public in any way, it's better to condense it into these kind of soundbite arguments, so it's going to be short and then go into nuance after. But anyway, that's a point for another video. And I think that you do see the destructive principle on the left as well. It's part of the zeitgeist of the last 60, 70 years with postmodernism, really based around this idea of, like, there's no absolute truth, so it can be quite literally deconstructed in Derrida's phrase, that all the kind of big institutions and narratives in the Foucauldian sense, that what's behind them isn't just truth or logic, but it's power that sustains them, and so power needs to be attacked with power. So there's some of that there as well. And again, like, I've been very influenced by postmodernism. I'm quite fond of a lot of the postmodernists, and that kind of, I'm fond of that anti-establishment drive and energy. So this is not a critique. It's only, well, this is a critique, but this is not a criticism only. It's just to point out what's also missing from this. I think, like, there's a tendency with all of this, especially online in the big podcasts, to drift towards critiquing everything apart from big corporate power. Maybe that's wrong, but I think, like, the problems we face are largely economic ones, and addressing the economy should be the number one principle of a kind of constructive left populism. But if you look at periods of the past where some kind of emancipatory politics has been pursued, whether that's stuff you agree with or you don't, whether that's something like the American Revolution and the writing of the Constitution, or Marxism and the working out of Marxist system and what it inspired in Russia, all of those things, or even back to the English Revolution and the idea of parliamentary sovereignty, there was a lot of thought going into building ideas up, and we're just stuck a little bit in this no man's land. I think the left in particular has to defend institutions in a way that also acknowledges that they need radically reforming and becoming more inclusionary, the expansion of democracy, so that you can have a kind of populism that draws on both those destructive and constructive energies. And I just worry that the former is easier than the latter. We need more constructive politics. Let me know what you think. See you soon.